All right, History 131, folks. Today we're looking at the other half of Unit 3. We're looking at Chapter 6. And this is hugely important. We have this whole revolution, and it works out relatively well during the revolution and just after we end up with the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation are really a loose agreement by the several former colonies to go ahead and cooperate. But the problem is that each of these separate colonies or former separate colonies is actual a sovereign state unto itself. It has its own laws, it has its own rules, it has its own leaders, and what we've decided to do is just cooperate. It uses a unicameral legislature. That means one house. And here's the problem is they've agreed to cooperate, but we're looking at tax laws. We're looking at importation, exportation laws. If you want to move goods from North Carolina to South Carolina, you have to pay an import-export tax. If you want to go ahead and move product from North Carolina to Virginia, you're going to have to pay taxes. The problem is it makes it difficult to trade. It makes it expensive to trade. Most states are not self-sufficient. Most states manufacture or grow one or two things and trade for the rest. And so it's very difficult for, say, Georgia to go ahead and trade goods with Virginia because they have to cross a couple of states to get there, so it jacks up the price of the product. Well, the unicameral legislature is important because every state has a vote. They have an equal vote regardless of size. And so it's a problem and it's a solution simultaneously. Rhode Island is a tiny little state. It gets the same vote as Virginia, which is a massive state in between. The thing is it's not so much a good way of governing as it is, hey, listen, we don't want to be what we were under England. Okay, we don't want to be run by a king. We don't want to have a faraway separate authority having power over all of us. And so we decide to enter into the Articles of Confederation, and it's cooperative. The problem is in order to change things, and there's always going to be change, but in order to change any of the Articles of Confederation, it requires a unanimous vote of all 13 colonies. Folks, it's difficult to get 13 colonies to agree on any one thing, even if they're sure it's going to benefit them all. So what we have is on a short-term, really non-workable form of governing between the states. It's going to result in some revolutions, some rebellions. It's going to result into some instances where they're going to have to try to quell some riots. One of those is Shays' Rebellion. And Shays' Rebellion is that one thing that finally points out that, hey, this is not going to work. And so we end up with the Constitutional Convention. And the Constitutional Convention is not to create a constitution, it's to rewrite the Articles of Confederation. But you're going to have some state actors, and among those state actors are going to be a lot of the names you already know, so I'm not going to go into them. But what we get is instead of a plan to streamline the Articles of Confederation, we're going to get a brand new constitution. We're going to get a competition between the Republican ideals and the Federalist ideals. And federalism is simple. That means one sovereign power over several states, one national power, versus this independent Republican idea that each of the states is sovereign. And so you're going to have an ongoing argument. And the ongoing argument is about how to create rule. We end up with two major plans. One is going to be the Virginia plan. The Virginia plan is all about larger states having more of a vote and smaller states having less of a vote. So think kind of our House of Representatives versus the New Jersey plan is all about all states having an equal vote. Okay? All states having an equal vote. And most of them are talking about having a unicameral, sometimes a bicameral legislature. But what we get is we get an ongoing argument, and we get what's called the Connecticut Compromise. And the Connecticut Compromise is an attempt to make everybody happy. When you're trying to make everybody happy, that's a problem. But this works because it creates this bicameral legislature, two houses. What it does is it gives us the Senate, which is one house, and each state has two representatives, two senators, and so every state has an equal vote regardless of size. The other house is going to be the House of Representatives, which is going to be based on population, not size, but population. And so the states that are more populous are going to get a little bit more of a vote, but we've always got that, equaling factor. And this bicameral legislature is also going to be sharing what's called separation of powers. We had a problem with the king. We had a problem with authoritarianism. And so what we decided to do is create a balanced government. And the balanced government is going to be the separation of powers. A legislative branch, which is going to be about creating laws. Judicial branch, which is going to be about enforcing laws and judging what is indeed correct and eventually criminal. And then the executive branch, and the executive branch is going to be about administration and helping also to enforce those laws. The idea being this is not one person has all the power, not one branch has all the power, but it's a system of checks and balances. Now, some of you are going to go, how's that working for us? Well, in spite of what some of you think, even right now, it's working okay. We don't have one group that has all the power. The other problem we have with this is we're going to have a discussion. The discussion is going to be about whether it's the states that have the right to rule themselves or whether it's the federal authority that should indeed have more power. And so we're going to have a struggle between federalists and anti-federalists. But in addition to that, you're going to look at something called the Three-Fifths Compromise. What's going to happen is states like Virginia, states like South Carolina, states like North Carolina and Georgia that are slave states. They're largely agrarian. They're using those crops that are very work-heavy, labor-intensive crops. Well, if you get down to South Carolina, you've got to realize that there's almost a 10-to-1 ratio. There's almost as 10 times as many slaves as there are free people. And so what happens is they want those slaves to count towards representation in the government so that at least they get a little bit better weighted vote when it comes to the House of Representatives. But there's a problem. In South Carolina and other states that have slaves, slaves are not considered people. And so the argument is, listen, if they're not people, they shouldn't count as population. But then those states are going to disagree. What's going to happen is we're going to end up with a Three-Fifths Compromise. A Three-Fifths Compromise is simple. Slaves are going to be considered worth 3/5 of a vote. Okay, it's not that they're 3/5 people, but it's going to be 3/5 of a vote for representation when they're counted for the House of Representatives. And so it creates an unequal status, and it also creates, to me, one of the huge issues with this Constitution. If we're talking about freedom, if we're talking about equality, if we're talking about all this stuff, how can you consider any person worth 3/5 of a person? And at the same time, how can you consider them 3/5 of a person yet consider them property? And so it becomes problematic, and it's built into the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't talk about slavery. It nicely avoids that, but it is going to set up some other parameters. In addition to that, it's going to start weighing things out. One of the issues we get is we're a reactionary government. The Constitution is actually a good thing, but there's going to be a lot of individual rights. There's going to be a lot of states' rights that are left out of it. And so you're going to have a big move by the group called the Anti-Federalists. They're going to be led by Thomas Jefferson, some other folks who are going to say, listen, we need some more guaranteed rights. We need some more guarantees because we don't want a king coming back in here. And so what we end up is a faction war or an argument between what are the Federalists and what are the Anti-Federalists to create a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is going to be the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. We built a pretty good Constitution. We built it with the ability to change and to adapt. It's not perfect by any means, but it's built with the ability to change and adapt. And those first 10 amendments, those Bill of Rights, are what you often hear referenced in the news. It guarantees the right to bear arms. It guarantees the rights to assembly. It guarantees the right to free speech and religion. Many of those things that they were fighting for in the Revolution in the first place. So take a look at this, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the government we set up with this shortly, and that'll be it for this unit. Thank you.